The mountain known as Everest is a peak littered with tragedy. Every year, dozens of people try to climb the highest point on the planet, but unfortunately, not everyone is successful. The bodies of those who died remain there, frozen in the icy heavens where they took their last breath, and the climbers who follow them use their bright jackets, boots, and colored oxygen tanks as landmarks. One nickname for the mountain is the highest cemetery in the world. Some bodies are never found. They disappear into the snow-white abyss, forever remaining on the unforgiving mountain. That's what happened with the expedition we'll be talking about today, a mysterious group of people who climbed to the top of Everest in secret, and little is known about their fate to this day. Everest has many names, from Chomokankar, Mother Queen of Snow Whiteness, to Sagarmatha and Chomolungma, Goddess, Mother, Nature, the names by which we know it today. Once listed on maps as peak number 15, it was not until 1852 that it was revealed that the peak so sacred to locals was actually the highest point on the planet. This discovery can be attributed to Radhanath Sikdar, a topographer from India. Officials from the British Topographic Service, of which Sikdar was also a part, decided to give the peak a different name in honor of their colleague George Everest. Crazy, right? There was nothing particularly special about him, but his name took root and soon outlived him. Nobody remembers the clerk Everest himself, but everyone knows about the mountain. Now it has been renamed Chomolungma, a name given by the indigenous peoples that suits the powerful mountain much better. At first, in the 19th century, no one made any special attempt to climb Everest. They appreciated it from afar, admiring and trembling before the harsh slopes. The fame of the mountain quickly spread throughout the world, so soon after Sikdar's discovery, climbers from all over the world joined the Buddhist monks in worshipping the peak. The desire to make it to the top inspired many promising athletes. As often happened in the heyday of mountain sports, a race began among climbers for all hitherto unconquered peaks, even though everyone knew it would be extremely difficult to climb the largest mountain in the world, and not all would survive the attempt. Several teams of athletes from different countries competed for to be the champions of Everest, and the British, who pretty much considered the summits theirs, wanted to prove themselves most of all. In 1924, an attempt was made by Andrew Irving and George Mallory, but it is not known whether they reached the top. Both men perished, and there are no photographs or any other evidence of their ascent. Year after year, Everest began to take lives, and not by the tens, but by the hundreds. As of today, more than 300 people have died on its slopes. Finally, on May 29, 1953, Chomolungma submitted to Edmund Hillary, a climber from New Zealand, and Norgay Tenzing, a Sherpa who adored his native Nepalese mountains. Norgay, who was awarded the honorary title of Tiger of Snows at the age of 24, became a national hero of India and Nepal. Indeed, climbing Everest was a huge achievement, and news of this feat quickly spread around the world. However, the group we're here to discuss tried to conquer the world's highest peak a year earlier. They were Russians, or rather a group of climbers from the Soviet Union, who secretly tried to reach the top. Obviously, such secrecy was needed in order to avoid competitors and attempts in any way to interfere with the plans of the Soviet Union to take the lead in this race. What was the point of this mission, and how successful was it? The super-secret attempt to reach the top of Everest began in the fall of 1952, when 5 military aircraft delivered 35 expedition members from Moscow via Novosibirsk and then to Lhasa. Judging by the scarce information we have, it seems like a scene from a spy movie. No one could know what the Soviets athletes were up to. The expedition was led by a certain Dr. Pavel Duchnelan, whose surname over the years has been spelled and pronounced many different ways. The expedition to Everest also included doctors, geologists, and physiologists, but not a single professional climber whose name would inspire confidence. Pavel Dachnilan himself, Kaminsky, Medzdarov, Lenivtsev, Indomnov, and Dangumarov moved to the top. The first names of the climbers, except for the leader himself, were either not recorded or were classified, so we only know their last names. The men were constantly in touch with Moscow. They communicated by radio, and as they moved to the top, they reported on their progress. Their last message was information that the group had set up camp at an altitude of 8,050 meters, or 26,410 feet. They were waiting for good weather, so within 2 days they would have stormed the summit. However, after that, Moscow didn't receive any new information. The radio went silent, and Dachnilan never got back in touch. Then Moscow started to worry and sent planes to Nepal to try to find the climbers. Large aircraft soared over Everest, trying to find at least some trace of the missing group, but there was nothing. Dachnilan and his comrades just disappeared into the thick cold snow in the midst of eternal ice. Then, Soviet search parties were sent to the mountain, reaching the place that the climbers indicated in their last call, but there was nothing there. No sign of their camp. Officially, no one in Moscow or anywhere in the world had even heard about the mission of Soviet climbers to Everest. There was nothing about it in the newspapers, radio, or on TV. It was as if nothing had happened. Questions about whether there really was a Soviet mission to Everest arose immediately after the disappearance of the climbers, and a battle of newspaper headlines between the West and the Soviet Union began, in which they accused each other of slander. Any reports from the West that the Soviet Union was fighting for supremacy on the highest peak on the planet were declared canards in the Soviet Union and were considered anti-Soviet statements. Stories about the mission to Everest appeared in reputable Western publications, but they were strictly denied by the Soviets. The planning of the expedition raised a ton of logical questions. Why did they set up camp in the death zone at an altitude of 8,050 meters, where the human body is slowly but surely dying? Why wait 2 days before going to the top? How did it happen that from 35 to, according to some sources, 160 people took part, but neither of the families of these people nor the members of the expedition themselves had uttered a word about it? Did everyone die on the slope, or were the others silenced? Where were the pilots of the planes that brought the group to the slope? One way or another, the story of the unsuccessful ascent of Soviet athletes to Everest remained a rumor that would be refuted and revived over and over again. An article about Dachnilan's expedition appeared in the American magazine Newsweek in 1957. In 1960, Professor Günther Dürrenfurth, a well-known explorer of the Himalayas, wrote about Dachnilan rather cautiously. The report of this catastrophe, which reached us from Tibet, was later refuted by the Soviet Union. Due to the impossibility of verifying the authenticity of this report, we recommend that you exercise restraint. The Soviet Union vehemently denied the existence of the expedition. For example, in the newspaper Soviet Sport in 1957, they published an article called High Mountain Canard. They tried very carefully to strangle this canard, as if they were afraid that people would begin to believe in it and it would spoil the reputation of the country. This story, however, was never completely refuted. In the book Everest, published in Great Britain in 1977, more than 10 years after the mission, there was a certificate with the serial number of the expedition. The list of the dead included Dachnilan and 5 colleagues. Ordinal number of the expedition, 16, year, 1952, leader, Dr. Pavel Dachnilan, country, Russia, route from the southeast. Even the first person to reach the top of Chomolungma, Norgay Tenzing, in his book Tiger of the Snows, wrote about the Soviet mission. In the late autumn of 1952, travelers who came to Solo-Khumbu, Nepal, from Tibet reported that a Russian expedition was on the north side of Rongbuk, almost at the same time as us. It was to be expected that the Russians would soon make a new attempt on the highest of the peaks. Everything narrowed, and there was practically no doubt that if the British did not win now, they would never see victory. Tenzing wasn't about to organize an expedition for the Soviet climbers. After all, they were his direct competitors. They had somehow heard of Dutch Nederland's group in 1952, but in the Soviet Union, any references to the doctor and his group carried a prison sentence. Peter Habeler, an Austrian who made it to the top of Chomolungma, also recalled the Soviet expedition, calling it the tragic attempt of the Russians to climb the peak. Officially, this expedition was never mentioned anywhere, but some information nevertheless leaked out, in particular, the fact that the equipment turned out to be outdated and there wasn't enough. Later, those responsible for this rash and poorly organized event were brought to justice and severely punished. Where he learned this is unknown, but it is possible that some information leaked into the circles of climbers. The part about the lack of high-quality equipment is quite believable. During their ascents, Soviet climbers often tried to trade what they had with colleagues from the West. At that time, the Soviet Union had a deficit of professional clothing, footwear, and aids. Years later, Soviet journalists and specialists would still write about the unsuccessful expedition, only in a completely different light. In 1982, a book was published by Master of Sport Archie Polyakov, who used a very logical argument to refute the story. Climbing Everest was, is, and will always be an outstanding feat. Is it possible that not one of the famous Soviet high-altitude climbers of those years took part? That's like if a team went to the World Cup and nobody knew a single athlete, not only fans but industry professionals. Lists of all masters and honored masters of sports in mountaineering have been published since 1948 in the yearbooks of Soviet mountaineering and in other publications. Soviet and foreign lovers of mountain climbing know all the most experienced high-altitude climbers who were active in those years, followed by the names of prominent Soviet climbers. How could it be that none of them was among the 160 participants in the Soviet Everest expedition? Where is the basic logic? Indeed, it would have made more sense to send the most experienced climbers of that time to the summit instead of a group of scientists and amateur athletes. Or were the organizers of the expedition following a different logic? The Soviet Union in the 1950s was trying to be first in everything from space to sports. Any win was encouraged, and failures were unacceptable. In the late 20s and early 30s, Soviet secret services organized and funded costly expeditions to the Himalayas and Altai, led by Nicholas Roerich, the famous Soviet traveler. His task was to penetrate into Tibet. The public learned about these expeditions relatively recently as well, only after they had been declassified. Expeditions to the highest points of the planet were only natural for the Soviet Union, especially in the unstable times when the country was undergoing the forced migration of peoples and mass repressions, and anyone who disagreed with the authorities could end up in the Gulag. Knowing how the Soviet government worked, it's not hard to believe that there really was a mission to climb Everest, and when it failed, it was classified. Anything other than a gold medal was an embarrassment. To prove to the world that communism is the best system, stronger and better than capitalism in every way, they had to get the best results, do the impossible. China had a similar secret mission to Chomolungma. They tried to reach the summit in 1960 and even reported that 3 Chinese climbers had made it: Wang Fuzhou, Tu Yinhua, and Gong Bu from Tibet. However, other climbers that arrived at the peak a little later than this mysterious group found no traces of them, and no photographs had been taken from the top. China continued insisting that their group had climbed Everest, but this expedition was considered invalid by all historians for a long time, although recently some are inclined to believe that China did make it to the top of Chomolungma in 1960. There seems to be some evidence for it. It's also strange that most Western climbers documented their every step on the way to the Great Peak, but no records of Dutch Nederland's expedition, information about his route, or any notes have been published even after the collapse of the Soviet Union. In addition, it was also impossible to find any information about Dutch Nederland himself. Did he even exist? Was it a pseudonym? Or was he just made up out of whole cloth along with his companions? Where's the proof that he was a doctor? Why was he called that in the materials about the expedition? Could it have been some secret military operation or a spy mission? Again, what would have been the point? Maybe all the names of the expedition members were made up and actual Soviet climbers climbed to the top. But even if just one of them was a professional, their experience would be of no help to the athletes. It's hard to survive in the death zone at an altitude of 8,050 meters, and it's almost impossible to spend a day there, let alone two followed by an ascent even higher. If the expedition did take place, certainly no one had considered the health and physical capabilities of the athletes. The Soviet Union needed heroes, Supermen, who could accomplish the impossible, and if they couldn't get the job done, their lives were of no use. Wikipedia lists the Soviet expedition of 1952 as possible, but there is no clear information on it, and Russia and China still deny that it happened. Nevertheless, the rumors give us enough reason to talk about this mission, which may have claimed the lives of either 6, several dozen, or more than 100 people. Soviet climbers returned to the top of Chomolungma only in 1982. This trip, officially the first Soviet expedition, reached the peak along a completely new route that had never been explored by anyone before, along the southwestern face and the Central Cold War. From May 4th to 9th, 11 climbers, despite suffering mountain sickness, reached the summit and made it back. They had dedicated this ascent to the 60th anniversary of the formation of the Soviet Union, and the next expedition of Russian climbers would be only in 2002, a decade after communism had collapsed. Maybe someday when the archives of the KGB are finally opened, one of the files will contain the answer to the question of what, if anything, happened on the slopes of Everest in the fall of 1952. Until then, we can only guess as to whether there was a secret Soviet expedition to the highest peak in the world or not. And what do you think? Leave a comment down below. If you like this story, subscribe to my channel so as not to miss any of my new videos. And as always, stay safe.